And welcome to This Week in the Triangle, where I talk about local news up here in my neck of the woods in North Carolina. This week we got some stories from Raleigh, Durham, Chatham County, Chapel Hill, around that area. So let's get into it. So first up, we have some. I don't even know how to put it. They are anti-deportation rallies, anti-ICE. Really, they are protesting against the enforcement of our nation's immigration laws, but not just against the enforcement in general, but the enforcement specifically against a large Hispanic population, which we have here in our state. They also have this element of nationalism, but not nationalism for America, nationalism for the nations from which these Hispanics have come, specifically Mexico. That's why we have seen protests all over the country and here in North Carolina where they are flying almost exclusively Mexican flags. And so that's what we have this first story here. Mexicans protest immigration enforcement in Raleigh. So this was last Sunday, a week ago. And as you can see from these photos, which I obtained from social media, you have a group of people outside the Raleigh Convention Center, and they have Mexican flags everywhere. There's maybe one or two or three that I saw flags of other Latin American nations, but what is dominated with these protests across the whole country is the Mexican flag. And they also had some sort of Mexican traditional dancers in the colors of the Mexican flag doing some sort of traditional dance, I guess promoting their Mexican heritage. And what we can see from the signs that they have here is that these appear to be mainly legal Hispanic immigrants who are in our country legally, but they are protesting on behalf of those who are here illegally, because the ones who are here illegally know that if they show up to a protest and wave their illegal face around, they could get busted by ICE. So we see here signs like "We speak for those who can't." For my family who came with nothing and gave me everything, that's translated from Spanish. My parents fought for my future. Now I will fight for theirs. And another one that is quite curious to me: no one is illegal on stolen land. That is a phrase on these signs that has showed up a lot at these protests. No one is illegal on stolen land. Now, presumably, this is a reference to the leftist concept that American land was stolen from the Native Americans. But if it was stolen from the Native Americans, then why would the Mexicans have more right to be here than we do here as Americans? If the Mexicans really believe that this is stolen land, why wouldn't they go back to Mexico, which is presumably, I guess, not stolen land? I don't know. I'm not sure I quite understand the logic here, but no illegal is on stolen land. Once again, this is in Raleigh. I believe they're marching around, and they also rallied in front of the Raleigh Convention Center. And so the next day, on Monday, we had a day without immigrants. Now, this was supposed to be something happening across the country where immigrants would stay home, would close their businesses to, really show those Americans how we're really dependent on immigrants. Now, I personally did not notice on Monday. I just went about my business as usual. So I guess for me, I'm fine without the immigrants. There's definitely immigrants that I like, but in terms of my dependence on them, I guess this was an ineffective protest for me. And the next story we have is the very next day was a protest in Sanford. Now, I wouldn't necessarily think of Sanford as a hub of Hispanic and you know Latin Americans, but apparently it is. And there is once again predominance of Mexican flags on the streets, lining the street of Sanford, North Carolina, as they, I guess, sort of celebrated their Latin American, their Mexican heritage, and demanded to stay here. Now, that is something quite interesting. There's a phrase, I think it's attributed to Napoleon: "Don't interrupt your enemy while he is making a mistake." So, since I don't really agree with the message that these protesters have, I won't give them any advice. But if I was to give them advice, I would say, waving Mexican flags does not ingratiate you with the American people. This is America. If you're waving American flags, then Americans might be more sympathetic to you. And so, once again, most likely these people who are out here are many of them probably are American citizens who obtained their citizenship through what's called birthright citizenship. They were born here. They are technically citizens. But when they have the opportunity to show their allegiance, do they show their allegiance to America? No, they show their allegiance to Mexico. They show their allegiance to these other countries. There's there's a couple blue and white flags. I believe it's Guatemala and Honduras, and they're also out in the street with the flags of their countries, Mexican flags, Honduran flags, Guatemalan flags, dancing in the street, waving their flags in the streets of Sanford, North Carolina. Once again, probably not what you think of as the most the most Hispanic place in America, but we have seen these protests pop up everywhere because over the last couple decades, the Hispanic population in America and in North Carolina has simply exploded. And next up, we have another protest that was going on, but had somewhat of a different character, and that was this anti-Trump 50 or 50501 protest. This was another protest that was organized to be across the country on I believe it was February 5th. So it's 50 protests, 50 states, one day. So 50, 51. And this protest was was more generally not just against the enforcement of our immigration laws, but also against President Trump. A lot of sentiment against Elon Musk and his Doge project to reform the federal government, cut a lot of spending, and the demographics of these the demographics of this protest was in Raleigh was definitely different as well. Definitely a lot less Hispanics as a fraction of the people who are out on the street, and a lot more white Americans, and also older. A little more boomers. But there were once again a number of people out there, Hispanics out there with their Mexican flags, saying we are Mexicans, basically. That's my take on it. Um, we are Mexicans. We want to show our affiliation to the Mexican identity. And I do see a couple questions in the chat. What's your thoughts on DACA? I believe that is, the dreamers, basically, children who came over to this country. They came over illegally, but they were children. Not necessarily their choice to come over. What do I think about that? Um, I mean, it's certainly a difficult question. These children didn't make the choice for their parents to violate our laws, but now they're here in our country. What are we going to do about it? And I think fundamentally my answer to that would be that we cannot make any rules that will encourage illegal immigration in the future. So if we say any children, as long as you're a child when you came over illegally, then we're going to grandfather you in. That's just creating an incentive for parents to bring their children in over illegally. So I'm not a big fan of that. I'm sympathetic to people who are dealing with the consequences of their parents' actions, but what children don't deal with to some extent the consequences of these parents' actions. So what I would say is, to any parents who are coming over illegally and bring their children with them, you are putting them in a very precarious situation where you're separating them from the culture of their homeland. Some of the DOC recipients, or some of the dreamers who are brought over as young children, they don't necessarily even speak the language of the country they come from, but then they're not here legally in America. They don't have a legal status in America. So I think it's just a difficult situation all around. Um, which would be much better if people simply didn't break our laws in the first place. But since there's a saying, when you're at the bottom of a hole, stop digging, and I think that is what we need to do first in terms of immigration is stop digging, stop making the situation worse by allowing all of these people to cross our border illegally and reside here illegally and work illegally, because even though all these things are against the law, they have been happening in large numbers to the extent where it's a systemic problem. And when you have a systemic problem, you need to fix the system. And I hope that is one of the things that the Trump will be able to do is not just make some change on the margins, but really change the system so that we're not creating economic incentives for people to come over here illegally to bring their children over here illegally as well. That's that's a little bit of my opinion on the DACA issue. So the next story we have this week kind of astonished me. It's from Durham and Orange County. So basically, there is this was in WRAL. Durham green card holder detained by ICE faces deportation on drug charges. So this article is about a man named Zaryab Hassan. So apparently he has had a green card, legal status since 2003. But in 2020, he started getting into some trouble with the law here in North Carolina. So his first charge was a drug charge in 2020, just marijuana possession, not the most serious charge. Um, but this was actually dismissed as part of COVID-19 mass dismissals. So apparently they're just going around dismissing charges because of COVID for no other reason. So So, he gets off with his first charge because of COVID. 2 years later, he is charged with distributing heroin and death by distribution. Okay, these are very serious charges. Death by distribution means that he sold or distributed drugs to someone and then that person died. This is a very serious charge. So he's in our country legally. He has legal permanent status with a green card, but he is facing this extremely serious drug charge. And so he ends up pleading guilty and he gets 36 months probation. So that was a charge in 2022. Now, since then, he has been charged in in three separate cases ongoing. One is felony probation violation, so he's violating the probation that he's on, still in our country, on his green card, even though he's pled guilty to a serious drug charge. And so And so he's also charged with possession of a stolen firearm by a felon. And he's charged with felony possession of cocaine and identity theft. These are all while he is on probation and while he is in this country on a green card. So he is here on a green card, and that can be revoked when when these certain crimes are committed. Violent crimes, I believe drug crimes can qualify for deportation. So from 2020 to 2024, he's facing these various charges. He pleads guilty to one, but he is not deported until Trump takes office. So last week he shows up for his probation hearing and there are ICE agents waiting for him. And I think that is absolutely correct. If you've been convicted of dealing drugs, you've pled guilty after you've been charged with death by distribution. Okay, someone died because you were dealing drugs and you're still in our country, because green cards can be revoked. Okay, it's not a right to stay here and do whatever you want and face no chance of being deported. No, if you have a green card, you do certain things that are bad enough, they will send you back. They can send you back, but they did not send him back under Biden. Now under Trump, he's going back. And I think that is kind of a no-brainer to me. Of course, you know you sell drugs in America, you get caught, you go to prison, you violate your probation, you're charged with possession of drugs again. Yeah, of course you should. Of course you should be deported. This is pretty obvious to me. And so the next story we have up here is from it's almost from Chapel Hill. It's from North Chatham County. Chapel Hill addresses, but technically I believe it's outside of the city limits, which is radical trans cultists hid out in Chapel Hill neighborhood before murdering border patrol agent in Vermont. So if you've been following the national news, you might have seen this story. Um, I believe it was right around the time of Trump's inauguration. There was a shooting involving a Border Patrol agent in Vermont, in which the Border Patrol agent was fatally shot and killed. One of the shooters was killed as well, and another one was wounded. And that story has gotten very interesting since then, because it turns out those two those two shooters who were the Border Patrol was attempting to conduct a stop. Um, they were both transgender identifying, and more than that, they're part of this strange cult called the Zizians, which are primarily their members are transgender. They also have some odd beliefs they sort of developed out of the rationality community. Um, if anyone is aware of that. But their founder, who goes by Ziz, who they're named after, has some very odd ideas about the mind and the soul, and apparently being transgender, and also being violent and murdering people. Okay, because this murder of the Border Patrol agent in Vermont is not the first murder that has been associated with the group. It is in fact the fourth. So there's approximately 10 current or past known members or associates of this Zizian group, and there are four homicides which have been attributed to them. And the connection to North Carolina, the local connection, why I'm interested in the story, why I wrote an article about it, um, is because prior to traveling to Vermont over the past year or so, this group has been holed up in a quiet neighborhood outside of Chapel Hill. And this neighborhood was was the location of an FBI raid earlier this week. So it was reported on the news, I believe, WREL. But they didn't know why the raid was going on until until Andy No reported on it. Said, hey, this raid in North Carolina was related to this murder in Chapel Hill, was related to this cult. So very interesting stuff. And so once again, this reporting that I'm reading from, I publish it online at thisweekinthetriangle.com. So if you wanna get into the backstory, get this information, get this news in your inbox every week, you can head over to thisweekinthetriangle.com. So so basically, on the afternoon of January 20th, Border Patrol agents stopped a North Carolina registered blue Toyota hatchback um, on a Vermont interstate, and there are two individuals in this vehicle: Teresa Milo Youngblood and Felix Ophelia Bachholt. So Bachholt is a German national, and so the pretext the pretext of the stop was that their database showed that Bachholt's visa was expired, but they'd actually been surveilling them after a hotel employee sort of called the police because one of them was open carrying a firearm. So the police had come to investigate. I guess they got the FBI and eventually the Border Patrol involved, and so they conduct this, I guess, this sort of traffic stop on the interstate, and it turns into a shootout. The driver, Youngblood, steps out, starts shooting. Bachholt has a firearm as well. Bachholt ends up being killed in the shootout. Youngblood is wounded, and a Border Patrol agent named David Mayland is killed as well. And so, so Youngblood has been charged with um, basically using a weapon, to impede a federal officer and basically assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon. I believe the firearm she had a 40 caliber. They found at least two casings at the scene. So she was firing at law enforcement. I don't think they necessarily released information about who fired the fatal shots in this case that killed the officer, but she is currently being detained in relation to that. And so it has come out since then by reporting by the Associated Press as well as Andy No that Bachhold and Youngblood were both living in a Chapel Hill neighborhood. So this is a neighborhood with a Chapel Hill address, but it is within North Chatham County. So I believe it's south down 15501 a little. So it's not technically in Chapel Hill city limits, from what I could find. And so so we know that both Bachhold and Youngblood were running units, but it appears that other members of the cult were staying at this location as well, including the leader of the cult, sort of the center of this cult of personality, Jack Ziz Lasota. So Ziz. So Jack Lasota is his dead name. If you go by the transgender terminology, Lasota identifies as a woman named Ziz, and this is what this cult, the Zizians, are named after. So according to Annie No's reporting, they were basically staying in this Chapel Hill neighborhood while they were looking for a place in Vermont to create another autonomous zone commune, like they had in California. Now, their commune in California ended with them running their landlord through with a sword. He survived, but shortly before he was going to testify against his killers, he was ambushed by another member of the cult and unfortunately murdered. That's one of the murders associated with this group. So I haven't heard of any murders related to their stay in North Carolina. We have not heard any murders related to their stay in North Carolina. It appears they were laying low here. We haven't heard of any trouble or any assaults related to their stay in North Carolina. But once again, they're sort of hanging out here. They had their box trucks, which I believe they were living out of these box trucks in California. They moved them to this Chapel Hill neighborhood, and so at least 3 of these cult members and possibly more were staying in Chapel Hill. So I found that a little interesting. So getting back to the next story, we have controversial Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools superintendent leaving position at year end. So if you've been following my reporting, I put out an article last year about Dr. Nia Hamlet. So she is still the superintendent of the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools District, and she has announced that she'll not be renewing her contract at the end of this year. She'll be moving on to a new DEI position as um, yeah, so she's moving on to a new position as a chief equity and development officer at a Maryland school district. So basically, last year there's been some controversy in her term as district superintendent. So it was discovered that she had plagiarized a lot of her doctoral dissertations. So she got a post-secondary degree from the the College of William and Mary, but she lifted several sections, including from a U.S. Surgeon General's report that she basically copy and pasted in her dissertation, without quotation marks. And so she basically said, "Oh, I made some potential errors in citations," but kind of just blamed everyone who was pointing out her plagiarism as racist, sort of a classic DEI response. And she is also currently facing a lawsuit from a father and son. The son was a former student. The lawsuit says that she retaliated against them because they were critical of her. So basically, that's a whole nother story. But her term in the school district has been marked with these controversies. She is very much big into the DEI. I believe that the district even cited her focus on equity, when hiring her. And she also her previous position prior to taking the position in Chapel Hill was at the Loudoun County Public Schools. And if you're familiar with sort of the school news going on, that might ring a bell for you. That was sort of a national scandal after they were covering up the sexual assault of a student by a, I guess, some sort of transgender identifying male student who wore a skirt and assaulted a female student, I believe, twice. Um, and so that was a whole issue in Loudoun County that broke not too long after she left. So now she will be out, and I kind of suspect that whoever they hire next to the Chapel Hill City Schools will will not be any less of a radical in terms of the DEI aspect of things. And so for our final story, we have three arrested after a large fight at East Wake. This is East Wake High School. Uh, the Wake County Sheriff's Office had to come break up a fight after a basketball game, and so they made three arrests, two adults, 18 and 19 years old, so technically teenagers, but adults, and they also arrested one minor. So the two adults were arrested in relation to the fight, which the sheriffs used pepper spray to break up, and and the juvenile was arrested in relation to a firearm, which the deputies were made aware of, that they found a vehicle on campus. They arrested juvenile in relation to this. Now, fights at East Wake, specifically large fights involving multiple students, have previously made it onto the news. There was a fight in the cafeteria in October 2023, which Wake deputies broke up, also using pepper spray. There are also fights in 2022 that made the news, and this doesn't seem to be a particularly good school. So they had in the last year that there is data for on the North Carolina School Report Card website, East Wake had 15.5 arrests per 1,000 students, and that is compared to a district average of 0.49 arrests per 1,000 students. So the students at East Wake are being arrested far more frequently than the average student. That's about 30 times. They're being arrested 30 times more often than the students. And I guess this isn't surprising if they're getting into fights like this regularly. Now, I sort of have, I guess, a bit of a unique theory about education is that the primary factor in a student's success is not the school, it's not the teaching, it's not the curriculum, it is the student. Some students come into school um, with a lot of potential. Um, you can argue about how much of it is based on genetics versus their upbringing, their culture, their family life. But all those factors, when you add them together, are far more of an impact than whatever they are being taught at school. The schools can impart knowledge; they can't necessarily impart impart talent or competency or intelligence. But one dramatic factor that will deeply affect your child's future is the culture and atmosphere of the school. And in this, schools vary widely. There are schools like this where apparently fighting is a pretty common thing to have happened. Now, I was homeschooled, and in my homeschool, there was no mass fights. Over all the years that I was instructed there, no mass fights. But apparently, for a lot of people, going to school, specifically K through 12, is when they are most likely to be assaulted. It's when they're most likely to be bullied. It's when they're most likely to face these things, which in their adult lives would be crimes, would be reported to their police. But in many school districts, this is commonplace for some of the students, and I think that is a very important thing that parents should perhaps consider more than the academic performance of a school district, which once again, a lot of that is just based on the students. You can break it down by demographics and see that varies widely. Maybe instead of looking at that, look at the safety. Okay, is this school is your child going to be assaulted? Are they at risk of being there's a stabbing at a Raleigh school not too long ago. So is your child going to be stabbed? Is your child going to be beaten up, assaulted? Perhaps those are are factors that are much more serious in your child's well-being than their academic performance, which once again, um, is largely, the academic performance is going to be the result of a lot of factors that have nothing to do with how good the teachers, how good the curriculum is, etc. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Once again, all of this local reporting, you can find it this week in the triangle.com. That's where I put it out. It's a Substack. You can put in your email, get it in your inbox every week. And you can also find all of the sources that we have referenced here tonight. So if you're here, thanks for tuning in. I hope you learned something.